Welcome, everybody. Welcome anyone who's returning and anyone who it's their first meetup. This is the Junior Developer Happy Hour. Sam and I started this meetup back around the beginning of May because we could see that things were getting pretty tricky for anyone trying to break into the industry. And honestly, even when economic times and there's not like crazy stuff going on in the world, when things are pretty normal, it's still hard to break into tech and get your first job here. So this is AMA style, ask me anything, really ask us anything. And in case anyone did not come through finding us on the meetup group, I am currently going to post the meetup right here in the Zoom chat. Just things to call out there somewhere. Here we go. I've got the Slido link kind of towards the bottom in that description. Slido is the best place to post questions for us to answer because people can upvote them, and just that way we know that we're getting to the questions that the most people are really interested in hearing answers to. If there are follow-up questions or if there are any sort of resources that we talk about that people can share, the Zoom chat itself is a great place for that. And then if anyone wants to stay around until the end, that's our piano, I think. If anyone wants to stay until the end, we can invite everybody off of mute to have more of a discussion style conversation at the end. It's always great to get to know everybody. I think that's about it about the meetup. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer at I'm seeing some teeth right now. Scary Halloween teeth. That was my nephew. So now you know. Yeah, I went to a coding bootcamp back in 2017, and I had not really known that I wanted to get into tech. I majored in Spanish, I minored in Italian, and then I moved to a German-speaking country. Like, I really knew that I enjoyed learning spoken languages, and I liked that process of learning the language, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. And eventually someone helped me connect the dots that learning a computer language was really fun too, and you get to make really cool stuff with it. So I tried out going to Dev Bootcamp, and I have been working at the place that I got hired onto ever since. I joined Trunk Club, and then in June we got absorbed into Nordstrom formally. So I'm mostly front end. Officially, I'm full stack. We do JavaScript, like React front end, TypeScript, and then our backend is Ruby, Postgres database. So that is enough about me. I'll hand it off to Sam and take it away.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'll just give a quick intro, and then I'll let Sophie give her intro before we get into the questions. So I'm currently a front-end developer at Lyft. I work in the mapping organization, so I'm mostly working with geospatial data. We use React, TypeScript, Node.js, pretty standard in the Bay Area at least. I started my coding journey a long time ago, but it took me a long time to get to where I am now. I graduated with a comp sci degree during the dot-com bust a long time ago, and I never ended up breaking into the industry. I gave up too quickly. Getting your first job is hard, like everybody here probably knows. It wasn't any easier back then. There were a lot less companies too. So I think I gave up after like 6 months, and I didn't even apply to that many companies. I had no idea what I was doing, and I had no mentors, and there wasn't a lot of people to ask on the internet back then. So I gave up. just took any job I could get. Ended up working at Kinko's, worst job on the planet. Ended up working in the mortgage industry after somehow, just taking any job I could get. And then that industry blew up in 2008, which is the mortgage meltdown, financial crisis, crazy times. And so when that exploded, I just said, fuck it. And I joined the Peace Corps and I left America for 3 years, hoping that it would be better when I got back. So I spent 3 years in West Africa, and it was a crazy experience. And while I was there, I found out about Dev Bootcamp, which was the first coding bootcamp. So I figured it was a good chance for me to try and break into the industry again. I had forgotten a lot what I learned, of course, because I didn't even keep programming. Like when I decided to stop looking for a job, I just stopped. So I forgot mostly everything. Plus I wanted to get caught up with all the new technology. So I went to Dev Bootcamp, and then from there, I was able to break into the industry this time. It's an awesome experience. I did everything from trying to help my friends start a startup, contract work, worked at a small, tiny startup where I was the first dev, and worked at a couple other companies before I got to Lyft. So it took me about 6 years into my career until I finally was able to break into a company like Lyft. So that's my coding journey. Now we can get our special guest, Sophie, to give her introduction, and maybe also tell us a bit about formation as well, just to help people like generate questions.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sophie, super excited to be here with everyone, and Sam and Brady, thanks for having me. So I guess just to give you guys a little bit of context about who I am. So I originally started my journey, I got a software or computer science degree from Carnegie Mellon, which honestly I feel like almost a little sheepish to say, because at the time I totally did not realize the privileges that were afforded to me having graduated from a well-regarded school. So right out of college, I started at Facebook, where I was the only iOS engineer on the privacy and tagging team for a while. And my biggest contribution there was building a large part of the composer, which is it's the thing that you type in to create new posts. It's pretty much been completely reinvented since I was there. But anyway, after 2 years there, I really wanted to explore working at a smaller company where I could make a bigger impact. And so I actually did a series of contracting gigs. And then I ended up at Nextdoor, where I was the second iOS engineer at the company. And very true to the experience of being at a super small company, I built from the ground up almost a majority of the features that were, and a lot of them are still in the application, including newsfeed, groups, events, privacy settings, built a lot of the underlying infrastructure around local persistence, networking, everything. And anyway, during my job transition, I think that's when I came to the realization of I think the privilege of the path that I was able to take. So we had a job opening for an iOS engineer on my team, and we literally couldn't fill it for over a year. And it was so bad. So bad, I went out and I was like, I'm gonna try and see if I can like train my own. And so that's what led me to discovering the whole world of coding bootcamps. And so at the time I was also, and I've always been just super passionate about equal representation in tech, was heavily involved in starting the Women at Nextdoor movement. And so I started by mentoring at HackBright, which is a coding bootcamp exclusively for women. And so when I was there, I discovered that coding boot camps were really great for getting people, teaching people to code, but in many ways weren't getting people to the even close to the level of engineering rigor that our teams were expecting. And there's always like exceptions, and that's not a blanket statement, but I felt that the training was insufficient. And in hindsight, you know, and thinking about it, it like kind of makes sense because, you know, it's not like these schools like Stanford, Berkeley, like they're just like terrible schools that can't figure out what they're doing. It takes them 4 years and coding bootcamp 16 weeks somehow. There is, you know, a difference, and the and so that's kind of where I really wanted to focus in the market. I really wanted to focus on helping people break into the most impactful roles in tech. And it's super important to me and to everyone at Formation. You know, we have situations in the world where, you know, the machine learning team is unable to like recognize Black faces because they never try to run the algorithms on a person of color. And, you know, as software just completely transforms the way that the entire world works, I guess I wanted to be part of the movement to help everyone be able to have a voice in what gets built, who it impacts, and how. Okay, so I guess, sorry, that was going maybe a little bit too far off, but anyway, bringing it back to today. So at Formation, we, again, focus on helping people break into some of these top tech companies, and not just to get any job, but to really launch an incredibly fulfilling and impactful career. And almost as a side effect, our fellows really disproportionately go to a lot of the top tech companies. Our average base salary is over 120K. Total compensation is like way higher than that. And we're able to get people jobs in, on average, 4 to 6 months, although we actually try not to optimize purely for time. And I guess in this time, I have personally done hundreds of interviews. I still personally and directly work with the fellows at Formation every day. So, so to whatever extent I can be helpful to people on this call, feel free to ask your questions.
Awesome. Brady is usually our moderator for the questions. So let's repost the link for the Slido. People can post and upvote questions in there. And then we'll get started with the AMA. And take it away, Brady.
Yeah, I can take it away. I hope I didn't like post the wrong link. I'm not seeing any questions just yet.
Wait, you can't see the questions?
I see 6 questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, me too.
Let's see. I may have. Ah, interesting. Okay, I'm not sure what happened. I was on the right date, but okay. Here.
Your internet's broken today.
It's just broken. Yeah, I'm telling you. Well, I'm not sure if I will be able to make them disappear as we ask them. But I'll do some more problem solving and troubleshooting while we get started here. So this one, the first one is, are AWS and S3 worth learning for junior developer roles?
Cool. So any question that kind of falls under this category of like, is X worth learning? I pretty much unanimously have the same answer, which is you should learn it if you want to learn it to a degree that you can build something with it. There's just so many people who approach learning from the perspective of like a checkbox type of system where it's like, now I have learned this, now I have learned this, and I will present all my checkboxes and the company will decide. So I would personally always start with the problem that you're trying to solve. And this might be like advice that sounds like it's for an entrepreneur or something, but it's also really relevant, I think, to people breaking into the industry. You know, once you've learned the basics, pick a problem that you want to solve. Like, even if it's something that, you know, you and your friends want to organize your board game nights or something, start with that problem and figure out what you need to know in order to solve that problem. And if it happens to involve learning AWS and S3, then I would learn it enough to build your product. But I guess to slightly more directly answer the question, I would say it also depends on what kind of roles you're going for. So if you're trying to go for like a production engineer role or like an SRE role, if you want to be eventually like scaling large scale systems and like being like the back end behind the scenes like wizard, then you should obviously probably lean towards solving or learning that more. But if you are really into building like super slick UI front end, then you know, focus your energies there.
Thank you. That sounds like amazing advice. That's definitely how I have, that's like my opinion that I've also offered in the past. I think it's come up here in the past before. And also here, right before I do ask this next question, I'm just dropping the YouTube channel where this will eventually be posted. It's my YouTube channel. Okay. The question is, are there any programming languages in particular you recommend to get hired or like really pop out and stand out from the list of other applicants?
Absolutely not. So there are absolutely zero programming languages where a hiring manager would be like, wow, they know that language, let's interview them. So again, I think it goes back to just learning what you need to build actually. And learning enough of that language to be able to build something meaningful. I would say, again, trying to answer more directly, I do think that JavaScript and Python are the most common languages right now at the different companies. So I would say that it will not help you stand out, but it might help you not get filtered out, I guess. So I would learn those languages. I would learn React. I would learn one of the common, you know, web frameworks. Node is a good one. And again, just focus on learning enough to build something. Don't focus on the language.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And for some reason, almost all junior developers have this question when I think it's not important either. Like, I agree with everything you said. I just want to add one more thing. Try to pick one that you like programming in too. It's easier to get better when you're like having fun with the language, because then you're having fun, so you want to do it every day. And the way to get better at coding is to do it a lot. So having it be fun and you not hating it makes it a lot easier.
I actually want to also add maybe a small analogy is if you want to think about learning like human languages. So like if you imagine someone told you like, oh, I like took this online course in Spanish, I would love to translate for you when you go on your trip. Like you try to just be like, what? This person probably just can't do that. That's so unlikely, right? As opposed to like this person like maybe like did something with the language, like lived abroad or something and actually used it. So like instead of trying to learn all the languages, like I'm gonna learn Japanese and Spanish and French and German and like whatever, right? Like you actually have to go into a language quite a bit before you can say that you know it well enough. So yeah. Pick one that you enjoy, I guess, and then stick to it for long enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have any tips for someone who went to a boot camp and doesn't have a STEM background, like a not non-STEM degree?
Yes, so we actually probably primarily work with, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I would guess around 75% of the people, if not more, did not come from traditional backgrounds. Again, you know, formation, we do really focus on creating new pathways for people. I think there could have been other ways that we did it if that wasn't a focus of ours. So as a result, it's just natural that a lot of people come from non-traditional backgrounds, had careers before this, or went to boot camps, etc. So I'll say a few things, I guess. So number one is I think a lot of times people discount their previous experience a bit too much. So if you did something before, like it had a career or did anything before, all I want to know is like what you achieved in that career before transitioning. So if you were someone who like, you know, got into the field of finance and like got promoted and like did really well, I would kind of extrapolate and assume that you would do the same thing in like in this field as well. But when I see someone who like is doesn't talk about their past, what they did in the past, it's and the assumption then is that they didn't do so well in that field, then it's like, okay, well then what are they gonna do here? And then I would say for people who are coming from boot camps, it's really, there's just a sea of people that I guess kind of like imagine the translator who's like, I took an online course in Spanish and I'm ready to translate for your company. And it's just like, there's so many. It's like from the other perspective, and you know, as someone who tried desperately to hire for my teams and stuff, I understand the other perspective as well. It's just like, you know, literally hundreds, thousands of applications, and I really try to the best of my degree to try to evaluate each person, but it is really hard. And so I think that the things that I generally look for is, I feel like I'm a broken tape record, is really that someone has, wants to build really cool things, right? And the best way to demonstrate that is to build something really cool. And it's an advice that I just say so much, but it's also like, and people always nod. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm gonna go do that. And then they have their like GitHub with like 5 personal projects that are never like actually launched. I think in the world, in the engineering circles that are at the top companies, like there's a very strong sentiment that there is this kind of mentality of like, let me just do like 12 weeks and I'm gonna go engineer, right? And then there's a very strong sentiment within the engineering community where it's almost like, roll your eyes, that's just not how engineering is done. Engineering is really hard. Sometimes, you know, one of my last projects at Nextdoor, I was asked by a designer to change the amount of pixels that was between each like post type. I won't get too much into it, but like newsfeed posts have like very different types of content within them, and depending on if there's like text or if there's photos or if there's an ad or whatever combination of them, we needed the exact correct number of pixels between each content type. And like, it seemed so simple because the designer just handed me a mock and was like, why doesn't it look like this? And I actually had to break it down and like show him that there was so many different scenarios. And this whole process literally took an entire week. And I would say that's relatively quick. Like at Facebook, that would have taken way longer. And so it's just like, you know, we don't want people who are going to do like this quick fix solution, get this really simple project out there and not like have the grit to push through really, really hard things. And the last 20% of a project is always that really, really hard thing. So if you're able to push through that and show that you can actually ship and launch something and get a real user. It's totally fine if it's your friends and your mom, like just get someone to use it. I think that would be like, that would make you stand out miles above like everyone else. Sorry if that answer was too long.
No, it gave a lot of context, a lot of great advice too. Thank you.
Yep, agree with all that too.
And I can also just underline what you had mentioned, that if you are able to lean into your previous experience, that is what is allowed. It allowed me to negotiate a higher salary when I was looking for my first job. So
Yeah.
don't leave that
I
out.
think that's super important too when you apply, especially if they ask you for like a personal statement or cover letter. You should include how your skills from your previous career can help the company somehow.
Okay, and I see I can repost the Slido link. That should be it. Cool. So next question is, which algorithms and data structures are most valuable to learn and use in practice?
This is a great question. And I hope you're not surprised to hear that the answer is not just, I have the 10 exact algorithms, and if you solve these ones, you'll pass all the interviews. I guess that's simply not true. So, and I see this energy a lot, I think, you know, like when people are applying to formation and we ask them like what they're currently doing, a lot of times people are like, I think, actually, to be honest, I think it's like 99% of people are like, oh, grinding the code. And I'm sure people on this call can probably relate to that. But anyway, I find that a lot of, it's not about the question. I think a lot of junior people tend to think that if they just see enough questions, hopefully, during the interview, they'll hit a question they've seen before, and that's the only way that they can pass an interview. So from the other perspective, right, like as an engineer who's interviewing someone, my hope is to give you a problem that you actually have not seen before. Like that's the goal, is I want to see how you solve a problem you have never seen before. So if you have seen it before and you know I didn't know that, that was like an unlucky thing, and maybe like I failed on doing what I intended to do. I always really try to focus on being valuable and you know, earning the position rather than just getting lucky and then getting a question that you like happen to see before. So instead of focusing on the question, and I see people like memorizing solutions and everything, focus on the problem solving ability. And focus on kind of an approach to solving the problem. I don't want to get too into it. We like could go literally for hours on this, but within formation, we kind of practice this technique. It's not really a technique, it's just like a step-by-step thing. So there's 5 steps to approaching a problem. So first is understanding the problem statement. It's so obvious, but like I would say 50% of people when they come to us, they like don't pass this step. It's just like they're starting to code right away. In a coding interview, if the first thing that you do is coding, you've done it wrong already. So by the end of this phase, if I should be able to, as the interviewer, ask you any question about this question, and you should be able to answer it to me. So I should be like, well, what would happen in this edge case, whatever. You should clearly be able to tell me what it is. So that is step 1 in a live interview that involves asking questions and stuff. Step 2 is coming up with the solution theoretically. So it is no coding at all. You should be able to use diagrams, at most pseudocode, to illustrate the high-level concepts that you need in your algorithm to solve the problem. It's like, okay, I'm going to use a heap. Why a heap? Etc. So that's step 2. Step 3 is coding. So it's like no coding until that point. And I always say that by the time you get to step 3, you should almost feel confident you can code it up within 5 to 10 minutes. And I know that seems extreme, but if you understand the problem theoretically well enough, it's a translation exercise. And then in reality, it might take a little bit longer, like 10 to 20 minutes. But so step 3 is coding. So step 4 is testing your code. This is actually easier said than done, because a lot of it is like finding the right test cases. So you want to not just have an arbitrary large test case that like isn't covering a particular edge case you're trying to test for. You want to find like almost the smallest test cases that demonstrate the different types of situations that you might get as an input. So that's testing. And you might go back and forth between coding and testing. And then finally, it's evaluating for runtime and space complexity. And when doing this last step, you might even want to do a little bit of comparison, like, oh, I could have not done a heap and saved on space, but it would have been more runtime or something like that. So I would focus on kind of like that problem-solving mentality way, way more than the individual problems. And if you do want to focus on individual problems, I would focus on at least the broad categories of problems. So I think you guys probably can find categories like on any of the websites, you know, just the classic linked list, array, sorting, become comfortable with string manipulation, trees, binary search trees, you know, the more advanced data structures like tries, heaps. And I generally advise actually to not invest in graphs because it takes so long and the bang for buck isn't enough. Similar with dynamic programming, but maybe a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, in my experience, string manipulation comes up the most, I think, at least in places I interviewed at.
It's actually, I find this too, and like, I think it's like, a lot of the string manipulation problems, they're also like not hard algorithmically. People just get super caught up on the syntax of manipulating the string, which is something totally within your control. So I really like back the idea of practicing strings a lot.
Adam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question on that. And within string manipulation, would you recommend getting a good understanding of regex, or would just vanilla string manipulation be a better option?
I would say actually just basic string manipulation.
Yeah, me too.
Far, yeah.
Yep.
It's like 95% of the questions are not going to be are not going to be regex.
Yeah, regex is, yeah. Even on the job, like you don't want to use regex unless you have to. At least that's my opinion. It's like hard to tell if like that regex, like especially if it's complicated, will cover like all the edge cases and stuff. It's easier if you like write an algorithm to do it, to like to understand what it's doing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Moving on to the next question. What kind of knowledge gaps do bootcamp grads usually need to fill?
Okay. I think this is like, I'm going to just keep count of the number of times I say this. I think this is like the 4th or 5th question I've answered the same thing to. So I think by far it's like just the ability to actually build or ship anything. Sorry, that probably came out wrong. But what I mean is, so I actually didn't go too much into the formation experience, but I guess to give a little bit of context, the first thing that we do at formation is we verify that you are able to be an engine. Like, so what we do is, we have literally no classroom or instruction or lectures at formation. So the first thing that you do, you come to formation, you get assigned a task or a ticket that's kind of similar to what you might get as an engineer at a real company. So it might be something like fix this little bug or implement this tiny little feature like adding a border. I'll go back into why it's so simple. So the next step is we do a ton, very rigorous interview training. And I always have to emphasize this because I think a lot of programs, they say like data structures and algorithms, check, they do it. But like for us, it's extremely rigorous. We have every single person passing like about a Facebook level assessment at the end of it. Anyway, so then finally we do like career coaching support and job hunting stuff. But anyway, going back to the first piece, a lot of times people try to build like really complex like personal projects. And first of all, they don't ship. So that's already really bad. But even if they do ship, personal projects are nothing like trying to add a feature into an existing code base. And one of the hardest tasks that we have in level 1 of this phase is there's this tiny little jitter that exists on this page when you first load it. And it's like in a personal project, no one would care. It's just like, it's literally like half a second later, it's like snaps back to normal, and it's like, it's all good. So obviously at a company that would be unacceptable. And it's really hard to figure out where the chain of logic led to that jitter happening. And so that's what we really want to bridge the gap, is to show people how you can approach a task and like find, you know, I remember the first time as an intern at Facebook, I was like, where's the comment where it says insert your code here? Because like at school, it's like, you know, there's like, now you edit this section and then this section. It's like, no, like there's like 1 million files in this bug, and you have to like figure out where to like even edit the code to like fix this thing, right? So, so yeah, I would say that's like the biggest skill gap, is just the ability to actually deliver value with your code.
Gotta find my unmute button. Here we go. Great. Okay, so is formation a good fit for recent bootcamp grads?
So yes and no. So I would say, okay, so the way that we do admissions is we actually do a typical interview process that a top tech company might give. So we actually do a take home and we do a algorithms assessment. So to be totally honest, we have had a lot of bootcamp grads apply and they do not even have the basics of data structures and algorithms. That's been not our focus, because we have found that there are enough resources on the internet that are freely available to get people to a point where we can accept them. So we really wanted to focus on our unique value add, which is kind of, there's this plateau point after which it's actually kind of hard to get stronger. So we do take people who are already kind of at least approaching that level. And so I wouldn't say that just like blanket everyone would make it in. But again, we're super focused on creating these new pathways. So every time, I think every single person who's ever interviewed, I hope, has benefited from just that experience alone, because we always give feedback and we will provide resources for people to self-study on their own if they're not at the bar yet. I would say that 50% of our people are recent bootcamp grads, so it's totally a fit. I would just say to not assume that it is. But again, we will definitely provide feedback if not on why and how to bridge it.
Wait, did you say 50% are recent bootcamp grads in
I would
the
say
program?
yes. Yes.
And then what does the other demographic look like? Like what other types of people like come to formation?
Yeah, so this is a kind of recent observation that we've made. The other half, I would say half of those people actually did go to coding bootcamps as well, but they've already been working for a year or two. And that's been a really interesting market for us, because like I know that the general mentality coming out of boot camps is get any job and then work up from there, and that's totally a path. One of the kind of roadblocks you might run into is once you have like 2 years of experience, now you're being evaluated as someone with 2 years of experience, and it's a different evaluation. don't get kind of like that new grad benefit when you can't do certain things. And it could be even harder to get a job sometimes. If you ask a lot of engineers, they'll say, right, like, I learned everything that I need to know on the job. Like, I didn't learn anything at school, like, especially the traditional school people, I feel like. And so, like, if you're not at a job that's giving you the types of engineering challenges you need to grow, then you're not learning those lessons. So we found a lot of people kind of in this bucket and that are unable to kind of elevate their careers into like the positions that they are like going for. And so, and that's kind of like an area that we also have like a unique value add.
That's very interesting. Okay. Here, this next question, is it worth interviewing at a startup for a support engineer role or a solutions engineer role as the first step towards eventually moving to become a software engineer?
Yeah, this is such a good question, and I think it comes up a lot. And you guys probably generally get the answer, like, it depends. And I'm gonna go into that bucket and say the same thing. I would say by default, I would go for software engineer role. And by far, formation people, we were like super focused. We like support engineer roles generally are not on our radar. We really try to almost like laser focus on that. And I do think that that is my top of mind advice, is to have the mindset that you are going to be a software engineer and not even have that as an option on your radar. Because as soon as you have that, you're like, you're not going for it as fully because you're like, oh, I have this backup option. As opposed to like, oh man, if I don't make it, I'm not gonna make it, so I gotta go for it. So obviously, like when it comes to jobs and making a salary to pay for your expenses and stuff, like you can't make a blanket statement advice. And I would say even to take other contracting gigs that are unrelated to engineering if you need to do that, right? And I think it also does depend on the company. Now, when I say it does depend on the company, I find that 90% of the support engineering roles do not fall under the category I would actually recommend to go into to transition. But there are definitely 10, maybe 20% of roles that where they do work very closely with the engineers and then there is transition. So it always happens, but you should just know that your odds are probably like 80% that it's like not like an easy path. But anyway, you're already not on an easy path. Yeah, so this was probably not helpful at all. I would say by default, go for the full role. And then I think situationally decide if you want. And if someone had a very specific scenario, we can maybe dissect that further. But what do you guys think? Do you guys get this question? Same, I actually don't know.
Yeah,
exactly what I should say.
We've had this question before, and I actually can speak from the perspective of someone who went with that route. I was hired on at Trunk Club as a support engineer role, and I didn't even have it on my radar that I think it is what you said, the percentages of people who start as a support engineer and then can transition to a software engineer, they're not in your favor if you're going that route. I didn't have it on my radar because when I applied for a job at Trunk Club that required more years of experience than what I had. And then the recruiter got back to me and said, hey, this role exists. Would you be interested? And I was curious in hearing more about the role. And so in the conversation, it came up that it was vacant because the girl who had been in that role before was being promoted to a software engineer. And she also had been to the same boot camp that I went to. And she was not the first person to have been like graduated up as a software engineer. So I knew that this clearly was a company that would get me, they're telling me that I could go and start in this position and then move into software engineer. And there was a clear history of that actually happening. So I felt pretty confident that it would be okay in my scenario, and that would be my suggestion for anyone considering this. See if you can talk to anyone at the company and understand if this is a path, if this is a path that other people have already taken. And then be a little bit more wary of, like, do they have a plan in place to actually help someone make that transition, and what would that look like?
You might be able to honestly actually just ask the recruiters too, because like ask a fact-based question. So not like, do you think I'll make it? But instead, like, what percentage of people typically transition, right? And once you're in it, like, you can also do your part to make sure, like, if you have a manager, it's like, when is my review to like see if I'll like transition.
Yeah, and if you take that role, just make sure you keep working on your software development skills. Otherwise, how are you going to get to being a software developer? You're going to just start forgetting everything, you know. So
Yeah. Okay, so this next question, I got my CS degree in 2010, but now I have a 7-year gap in my resume. I had a lot of irrelevant jobs in the meantime. How do I market myself?
Cool. So I think, first of all, do not be ashamed of your 7-year gap. I think that a lot of people, when they have different stories, they almost try to cover it up and make it seem like more of the typical stories, like, oh, that 7-year gap didn't really happen, like blah, blah, blah. And like that lack of confidence definitely shines through. In addition to the fact that more often than not, that gap in difference in the story actually makes you more interesting of a person than just like the typical sea of applicants. And so I guess it would depend on what you did during those specific 7 years. Is the person who asked, like, are they on the call? I think I would try to identify maybe somewhere between 1 to 3 facts that, or like things that you did during that time that are most unique and interesting about you. When I say unique, a good criteria is you tell someone this fact and that person is unlikely to know anyone else who that has that fact be true about them. And I keep saying fact because I think a lot of times people say things that are just like subjective and like opinionated, like, oh, I'm like super curious and like, et cetera, et cetera. So like just things that you factually did. And then if there's anything that you achieved that was of note, right? Like you, even if you just like place first place in this, like, I don't know, eating contest that was like really interesting and impressive, some level of achievement during that 7 years, that also is like fantastic. Okay, and then really building it part of your story, and do not try to come up with that story on the spot. Like before you go into an interview, you should be clearly understanding and feeling confident, and do not just keep working on that story until you feel confident in that, because it will be a waste of your time otherwise, like likely otherwise. But if you get that story right and you figure out how to tell it, it honestly, and I'm not just saying this, it can make you a much more interesting candidate. So I guess the next thing I would want to know is, like, obviously what made you leave and then what made you come back. And so that should be woven into the story as well. And then finally, this is like a tiny plug, but actually this is this type of situation we've had come up with formation a lot. And it's actually a pretty like textbook situation for something that we're like really good at helping. It's actually kind of a sweet spot. So specifically, you know, getting back up to speed and working on a modern tech stack. So, you know, we do like React, Node, Material UI, etc., doing real tasks within those environments, and then kind of getting a super accelerated interview prep program. So if that's like interesting to you, don't need to like super promote formation or anything, but yeah, make it your story and own it.
Yeah, and I can just add, I had a bigger gap than that. My gap was 11 years. And I think my story was mainly, I told about Peace Corps because that was the hardest thing I ever completed in my life. So that was the story I told, like when I met people. And I just built a lot of things and volunteered a lot. So people who come here all the time, I've told this story a lot. In the beginning, I just did a lot of hackathons. So I was always building new projects and stuff. And I met a lot of people from doing those hackathons because a lot of times I would just join any random team of people who were working on something interesting. And I would become friends with them because you're just hacking with them all weekend or whatever. I went to a lot of meetups and volunteering. You meet a lot of people. I got all my first jobs from like people I met or were talking to at meetups or met at meetups and stuff like that. I actually haven't applied to any of my software engineering jobs. They all just randomly come up like through conversation from somebody at the meetup or referrals. And then later on in my career, like recruiters just like reach out to you. But yeah, just wanted to add that from my own personal experience.
And I think that's like spot on in terms of like your experience at Peace Corps. It sounds like super unique. It sounds like something that, you know, it sounds like you had like achievements in it as well. And like, I don't know, it sounds like someone who wants to do great things. And like, that's like people want to give you a chance. They want to see some spark that they're like, okay, let's give this person a shot. Like they actually want to, but you have to give them some like hook to hook onto for that.
Well said. Yes. Okay, if this person isn't getting any phone screens, interviews, does that mean that they're doing something wrong?
So I would try to avoid like the language of just thinking that you're doing something wrong. In reality, there's always things that I'm sure you can do better, right? But that doesn't mean that everything that you're doing is wrong. You're probably like applying to companies. Is that wrong? Probably not. Is there better ways to apply? Probably yes. So there's not, I would say, a single textbook solution. And internally with formation, we like debate a ton over like what the advice should be for our fellows. And what we always find is that it really isn't like a one size fits all solution because of the nature of the market. Because as soon as one like technique were to be overwhelmingly the like successful one, then like by nature, like everyone would do that and then you would no longer stand out. And so I always try to have people like focus on what makes them unique and the approach that you want to take. So there's tons and tons of options within this, right? So some people are really just fantastic writers. And like, I think that you should really lean into like writing a beautiful cover letter or a beautiful personal note to the recruiter that you reach out to directly. Some people are like really good on video actually, and you should send maybe like a quick loom to like just, you know, bring energy to the table and connection. Some people are really like love polishing, like they make like really beautiful like products. And so they should like really invest time in building a personal project. I would say that I would say that if you don't have experience or something else, like think from the perspective of the hiring manager. Like in reality, like as I described, I really do try, like especially being in this industry myself, I try not to be a hypocrite. And so, but we get hundreds of applications at minimum. And like literally, I had to turn off notifications for LinkedIn because it's like literally every like, I would say 5 minutes, we get another application, and after a day, it's just like crazy. And so when you see that, how do you possibly process this list, right? It's just like all of a sudden, that's why it's like with school, you know, like what is the previous company, because it's the fastest pieces of information that I can get. And so when scrolling through a list of things, you should have a very clear reason as to when scrolling through a list, why yours would be different from other people's. And I would really focus on just being different. The difference might not work for every person. It might be like, this is so weird. Like one of our fellows like had this resume that was like 7 different colors, and like they had like a photo of them doing some kind of like weird, like, okay, I shouldn't say weird, it's like interesting ritual thing. And he came to me and he asked me like, should I like give in this resume? And I looked at it and I was like, I think yes, because I really think that it will connect with someone. And I think it was actually like, I think I would actually give him a shot because it was just so like interesting, right? And I do think that some people will look at it and be like, this is totally like insane. But then you have a better chance of connecting with the person that like matters. So again, whether it's that you like are really good at speaking and you have this thing that stands out, and you're really good at writing, you have this like beautiful like paragraph describing how you're going to contribute to the company, whatever it is, like make that like shine through.
I love that. I'm so proud of one particular application that I did where I had to write a little blurb about why I would be a good fit for that role. And they were talking in the job description about how people needed to be able to wear a lot of hats and how no job was too small for them. And I was like, oh, when I was in the boot camp, I was upset that there wasn't a recycling program. So I started one, and I started like bringing my recycling back. There wasn't a place at the building, so I would like take a sack every time I went back. And so I talked about that as like a separate thing, that like why I might be a good fit for that role. And it sticks with me to today. I'd never heard back from that company, but you had mentioned something about like, it doesn't matter how small or insignificant and like not code related it might seem. I absolutely agree with that.
I mean, I don't think that's small and insignificant, first of all, but
Yeah, showing a little bit of creativity can like help you out. Like I remember this one story, I don't remember what company it was, but this guy just went to the companies he was interested in, and he would like just bring them a pizza and he would drop off his resume with the pizza. That's kind of memorable, you know, if you do that. That was one story. And then a story from Dev Bootcamp is this, the person who is now the CEO and founder of HipCamp, she went to Dev Bootcamp. She was in a cohort like a couple ahead of mine, I think. And she went to Dev Bootcamp because she wanted to make HipCamp. That was the reason why she went to Dev Bootcamp. But the story is she didn't even get into Dev Bootcamp. She just showed up on the first day of the cohort and pretended like she was a student. And she went the whole day until they figured out she wasn't actually in the cohort. And then they respected what she did actually. And they're like, okay, you can be in the cohort as long as you pay for it. So that was another story about just being creative. Like she didn't even get in, but she got in by doing that. And now she like raised a ton of money and making like the camping version of Airbnb. And so
that's a very like strong demonstration of like fake it till you make it, right? Literally, I am in this program. I have showed up. I am in this program.
All right. Next question then. What's Formation's application process like, and what's the acceptance rate like?
So the application process is, we have an application online. You fill it out. There is, I would say that the things we look out most for are either one of two things. One is we ask you like which of these like things, just a general technical assessment of like which things you feel comfortable with. And if you're very good on that, then that's okay. The other thing we look for, if that isn't true, is the paragraph. We ask you about why you want to be an engineer. So we've had people who have weaker skills but have a really strong like story, and then we love working with those kinds of people. I actually have, this is so embarrassing, I have no idea what the acceptance rate is. I would say that it's probably somewhere around, depends on where, like starting from the very top of the funnel, it's probably pretty small. It's probably in the like single digit percentage. But once we get on a call, it's probably closer to like 25%. Yeah. So the whole process is you will first talk to a fellowship coordinator. And so throughout the process, I guess I'll share a little bit about the experience. Throughout the process of formation, you will be working with a bunch of senior engineers that are currently at top companies. We pair, it's not like you have a single mentor throughout the entire experience. We pair you up situationally depending on what you need in the moment. So like someone, if you're working on like algorithms, and even easy versus hard algorithms, you need different types of people. Or if you're working like on a front end task, or if you're working on your systems design, then we will talk to an engineer who is like builds large scale infrastructure in their jobs, or you'll be talking to someone who builds like front end like code for their at their companies. One of the things that leads to, sometimes it can feel a little bit more fragmented. So we have a fellowship coordinator who works with you throughout the entire experience. They onboard you and they actually have the first call with you to see if the experience is aligned. They help you through the entire experience to getting placed at a company. So first calls with them, they will ask you point blank about like where your technical skill level is, and then we move you on to a technical screen, which is the interview process I talked about. The interview process is pretty much verifying everything that you kind of self-reported during the first steps. And then I would say we're pretty accurate. So once you get to that step, we probably have like close to 50% of people pass. Yeah, and then everyone who doesn't pass, we always give like feedback and advice to.
Okay. Should I worry about getting siloed into a role when looking for my first dev job or second or third job, like stuck as a front end engineer when they actually want to be on the back end?
Yeah, so I would say a little bit. So going from 0 to 1, which is what most people I guess on this call are probably doing, is definitely the hardest step. I do think it is easier to transition than it is to go from 0 to 1, but it is still not like trivial. It's obviously still easier to go from front end to front end. It depends on also like which company that you're at. So generally, I would say that the most common way I see, and because people do all kinds of different paths, but a common one I see is like being at a like pretty large company where you can like transition within the company. Like at Facebook, for example, there's this like 18-month hacka month, and like after 18 months, you actually get to join any other team that you want to like experience that and potentially switch. So being at like a large company where like there's like flexibility to move around is good for that. I would say actually on the flip side, being on a super, super small company also allows you to do that because you're going to be forced to work across the stack. So I guess the mid-sized company is the least likely to switch, I think, because they will need you to do your role and not have enough resources to allow you to move all over the place and still want you to be specialized. Yeah, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Like if you really have the will to make it happen at that next step, it will be easier than this current step. And as long as you're a full like software engineering role, I would say like front end to full stack, for example, is not super difficult. Full stack then to back end is not super difficult. But like full stack to maybe like a machine learning engineer, or full stack to like VR, etc., is, or other like, yeah, would be a little bit more difficult. I'll also find the ad that when I was at Nextdoor, I was really super blessed to work with some really like top tier engineers. Like they're so good. And I would say that like the people that performed well could always go wherever the heck they wanted. Like it would be like the company is just like desperately trying to keep them, and like whatever they wanted, they like went to do all kinds of different things. So if you do a good job, you're also more likely to be able to switch. So yeah.
Excellent.
What do you guys think?
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds, I don't have a lot of experience with people switching roles, so I trust what you have said.
Okay.
All right. So your website mentions training alongside top engineers from Facebook, Google, etc. Could you explain how your fellows train with FAANG engineers? And also bless you.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, so one of the things that I saw when I was mentoring at boot camps was that sometimes, and by the way, I like sometimes struggle to like kind of put my thoughts into words because there's a lot of different perspectives I'm trying to balance. So this is not meant to be like offensive, but sometimes I have noticed that in super junior engineering groups, things can become like almost like a little bit of echo chambers of bad practices. And like people will just kind of give each other the wrong advice, or like something that worked for them but isn't actually the right approach, for example. And so one of the really key things we wanted to do was make sure, because I feel like I learned everything from working with great engineers. So we really wanted to create that experience where you're working with great engineers. So the key thing that we try to do is create opportunities for you to do this. So the way that it generally works is we have engineers who are registered on our platform, and they're kind of like, everyone has like different specialties again. And depending on what you're doing, you, at the time, you will be put into like session groups with the senior engineers. So as I mentioned, we don't have any classrooms, we have no lectures. So whenever we have a session, it's literally with like, I would say 4 people on average, literally never more than 8. So you're talking directly with the senior engineer on the call. And you do different types of activities. So one, for example, might be a live code review where you have submitted your pull request for a particular feature, and then the senior engineer will walk through like their thought process in evaluating your code and why. In another portion of the program, you might be working on algorithms, and the senior engineer, you might be working with 3 other more junior people, and the senior engineer will present a problem as if it's an interview and kind of walk you through the thought process of how to like approach this problem. And every single week, we make sure that there's lots of interaction with the people from the companies. I don't know if that quite answered the question. It's a little bit like, our program is like it's not a curriculum. It's not like a one size fits all. This is what you do week 1, week 2, week 3. It's very personalized and dynamic based on what we see you doing. The biggest downside of that is just explaining it, because it's a little bit more complex than like, oh, week 1 and week 2, week 3. But yeah, just to answer the question, you are directly talking with and collaborating with engineers.
All right. What resources would you recommend for practicing code challenges and puzzles for a way to keep sharp in that area while job hunting?
So I don't think I'm going to be super innovative here. I do think that even as much as I say it's insufficient, like obviously you should still be doing problems on LeetCode, and you should. There's a couple of other resources. I think Interview Cake, for example, is a pretty good one. That one actually kind of walks you through the thought process a little bit more, which I like. So let me try to bring a little bit more to the answer than just, okay, go to these obvious resources. Okay, so number one, I would focus on, was the question actually related to algorithms or not? Okay, I'll think that it is. So
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was saying practicing code challenges and puzzles. So I believe it
Okay.
would be related to algorithms.
Okay, so, okay, then I have actually a very specific advice. So by far, I see people like 100% making this mistake. So I think that people need to be practicing easier problems than harder problems. I think everyone's always like, oh my God, I can't solve the hard problems and therefore I'm gonna bomb the interview. I'm only gonna do the hard problems. I think that's a little bit kind of like trying to run when you haven't learned how to walk yet. And it's like, maybe you'll eventually get there by just continuously trying to do this, but it actually will take longer. So it's better to build your foundation strong. And when I say easy, I mean like very easy. I think people, it's almost like too easy to be on LeetCode. For example, like if you cannot iterate through a linked list or like reverse a linked list in like 5 minutes max, like you're not ready. I would say I would continue focusing on that until it's like trivial to you. You've got to be able to iterate through a tree using breadth first and depth first search, like trivially. And so I would focus on that before kind of advancing to almost LeetCode and that kind of thing. Then when you advance to the kind of like tougher problems, I would try to focus on one problem area at a time rather than like a difficulty level. And I would not try to optimize for the company. A lot of times people are like, oh, let me find like the Facebook questions and do that. It's like, I don't think that's like super helpful. I think instead, like work on like string manipulation problems, for example, until like you have crushed that. And then like going from easy to like difficult, like string manipulation problems, and then moving on like category at a time. And then the final thing I'll say is to keep an eye on the time. I think that most people fail because like they could get there given 3 hours, but it's like the interview is only an hour. So so I would make sure to time yourself to continuously evaluate yourself against that interview standard.
I think that's brilliant advice. I think a lot of people that I have talked to can struggle with like feeling motivated and also like the imposter syndrome side of things because they are starting at a level that is just too high. And if you're going to get better, it's because you're doing things over and over again. So I love that to take small steps. I always bring it back to like I had to take some weightlifting class when I was in high school, and every week you would like just show up and do just what you were capable of doing, and by doing that we would track our progress, and like each week I would add 5 pounds to how much I could do in my weightlifting, and like it felt like I wasn't stretching myself, but I don't know. Yeah, it just made me think of that analogy.
That's such a good example. Like you wouldn't just go and be like, okay, day one, I'm gonna lift like 300 pounds, right? That would just be so counterproductive, yeah.
Yeah, you gotta have patience. And we say this a lot, but it really is a marathon and not a sprint. You don't have to become a senior developer tomorrow. That's impossible. So just concentrate on getting a little better every day. And if money is a problem, I recommend trying to figure out how to extend your runway. Like, just bite the bullet and move back in with your parents if you can, or friends, or somehow lower your expenses so you can extend how long you have to practice, and start with the fundamentals and just learn a little bit every day and get better and better and better, and then work up to the harder problems.
Great. Okay. Do you have any recommendations on how to structure your day between applications and studying, and any resources you can share that would help? Okay, so I think we shared a few of the resources that would help with algorithms and JavaScript studies. If you have more resources, would you be able to share those? But otherwise, like, how to structure your day, I guess, is the request.
Mm-hmm. So I think it might actually depend a little bit on how each person prefers to work. The one thing I've kind of given as advice sometimes is to visit problems more frequently rather than actually doing huge long chunks. It's just kind of like it's kind of like a psychological thing where it's like better to have like more smaller chunks of time than to like cram for a long period of time. How to structure doing applications versus doing algorithms. Yeah, so I guess if you're trying to think about like, okay, I want to like prepare for like 3 months. What the one thing I constantly give as advice is that algorithms takes like way longer to sink in than you might think. It's like very like teaching someone. Sorry, I muted myself for a second. It's like kind of like learning how to ride a bike, in the sense that like once you know it, it's almost like, how did I like not know how to do that before? And it's like it's really hard to teach someone. It's like, why don't you get it? It just like the logic is there. So but in order to get that intuitive feeling, I feel that it needs to like, you need to extend the amount of time that you have total on algorithms. It's like much harder to, I think, like cram over a short period of time. So I always recommend doing like a few algorithms per day. And actually, when I say few, it's like I would like define a cadence and just be super rigorous about always making sure you see that many problems per day. In reality, it's like there's probably micro optimizations within there that you can do, like certain types of problems. As I mentioned earlier, like you can focus on problem areas and stuff, but like the broadest advice is just to like at the minimum do a few problems every single day. I don't know. I don't think that was like super insightful, but do you guys have anything to add?
No, I think it's hard because it does depend. Everybody's different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just the main thing is you make a schedule, I think.
Yeah.
Like, you figure out what works for you and just try and stick to the schedule.
Easier said than done.
If you stick to it though, like it starts to become your routine, and then you just do it automatically once it's a part of your routine, you know. But
Yeah.
you have to make it your routine. Like, don't make it too crazy, because then you're not gonna stick to it. You have to find the right balance, which is like, okay, I can handle doing this every day. That way you don't quit. If you make your schedule 16 hours and that's not your personality to go full blast for 16 hours for months, then that's probably not a good idea.
I don't know whose personality is of the type that they're like, I love 16 hours.
They exist. They exist.
We had someone on here as a special guest and it blew everyone away.
Yeah, I know
Oh,
some
boy.
people like that who just, even like some people that went to the boot camp, man, they just went full blast every day, and they came really good, but I don't think it's possible for everybody to do what they did. They just coded all day, like from when they woke up to like they went to sleep every single day.
And even if it's possible, you never know when someone's going to burn out. And
Yeah,
once you burn out, it takes a lot longer to get back into it.
yeah. So you got to learn your limits.
Actually, I have a little bit so I have this like random like I guess analogy that I've been using a lot, which I think in terms of like working hard and like I don't know, admiring these people's work ethics. I think that work ethic is actually very much like endurance when it comes to physical exercise. Like I do believe that you can actually work up a stronger and stronger endurance over time and actually do more algorithms every day. But rather than, again, like just going on the first day and running a marathon, it's like you can actually build it up. But you do want to like, I think I agree with you guys. And like the number one thing is to make a plan that you can actually follow, and consistency is going to win out over like the short burst. Yeah.
Alrighty. Whoops, I'm on the wrong tab. Okay, so do you have any advice on how to determine if a company may not be a good fit due to their culture or their work philosophies, for example?
Culture and work philosophies. I think this is probably, of all the questions so far, the one I feel it's the hardest to have a very clear answer for. So first of all, whoever asked this question, I think it's like amazing that you're asking this question. I think the first mistake is actually not asking this, because I feel like a lot of people I speak to in the junior kind of space, they're like, job, any job, please. And you're not considering like how it will fit for you day to day. So let's see, what kind of insights? So one thing that I've seen consistently, like a mistake, I guess, is I think that people in general tend to over optimize for the product, because when you're evaluating a company, that's like the most public and like easily accessible thing. But in reality, the team and like your direct manager is going to matter way, way, way more than the product or even the tech stack that you're like working in. So if you're like comparing different companies, I would really, really optimize for being with the right people. Like the bar for you to make a passion decision because you love the product should be like extremely high. Like it should be like, this is what I feel like I'm born to do type of level, but otherwise like really optimize for the team. So I think that the best way that I can come up with on the spot to do this is like to try to ask people like factual questions about their day. So rather than like saying like, you know, what's great about working here, you can ask them like to describe like an actual day that or a week, and ask them like things like what were the like best parts of their week versus like the worst parts of the week, etc. And really focusing on like the like typical week, because what I'm trying to do is kind of capture like be able to visualize what your experience is going to be, right? Like how are new people like onboarded, like how does product decisions like actually get made, like how much of a say does this person like get in in their day-to-day. And I would say that like the people closest to your like level, so like relatively like IC junior, more junior people will probably give you a better assessment of that than like the hiring managers, which are actually, if they're trying to hire you, the hiring managers are going to be like trying to sell, right? So as much as possible, like talking to the people in your loop that are like closest to your level. But you can also like, if you don't connect with people, like if you don't have that opportunity in the interview, then you can also like reach out to people on LinkedIn, right? I have found that like surprisingly, like people do respond, and definitely not everyone, right? But if you reach out to a few people on LinkedIn at a company and tell them like why you want to connect and just like make it seem really easy for them to help you out, more than likely actually someone will probably respond. Yeah, I guess that.
Yeah, I agree. I think just coming up with a lot of questions, and you can search for a lot of questions and try to find out what other engineers who have recently started or who have been working in the industry for a few years, what would be important to them in a culture to look out for. Sam, I'm going to do it. I'm going to post your key values site.
Posted it already.
Oh, you did? Oh, right before me, and I wasn't looking. Yep. Yeah, that site is great for giving you a couple of ideas of culture aspects that you might want to know about a company, and then how you could approach talking to people at the company to find that information out and not sound like you're trying to work as little as possible and just take advantage of it.
Paycheck.
Yeah. And by the way, Key Values is made by another Dev Bootcamp alumni. I pair programmed with her probably a few times when she was a student at Dev Bootcamp. Now she made this awesome site, Key Values.
You know, what I actually really like about this is like earlier when I was trying to come up with questions, I realized why I was like struggling to come up with examples was because I couldn't imagine who was doing this work. And I think that what you really need to start with is what is labeled step 1 here, which is like actually have a strong conviction about what it is that matters to you. And I think in the end, the questions that I came up with as examples were things that mattered to me because I want to have a say in what gets built in the product. And I want to, like I have a particular way of collaborating with engineers that I think it matters to me. And so I would maybe like start with here, this great list here, and like pick like no more than 5, maybe like targeting 3 things that are most important to you, and then forming your questions around that. And I think that a lot of times when people are in that like job state, are like they don't even take the time to think about that. So yeah, I like this a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah, that question is always super hard because everybody has different values of things.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time, Sophie? We're at 1:30 now.
I can definitely go on for a little bit longer, however long. I don't know. This might be like too boring for people too. So whatever.
No,
whatever
we hardly ever get through all the questions by this point. So it usually depends on the guest, like how much time they have.
Cool. Well, I can go for probably at least another 30 minutes, but yeah. So I don't know if that's too much time for you guys, but I'm happy to stay on if people have questions.
We usually go for over 2 hours.
What do you think?
Well, then let's keep going.
Maybe do like maybe 3 or 4 more questions, Brady, and then we can like turn off the camera and
that sounds good.
People can introduce themselves if they want.
All right. So this next one here is, do you have any tips on good beginner friendly but is good enough project ideas to impress recruiters and hiring managers?
Okay, the return of the like all-time answer to everything. I think this is going to make another appearance, but I think personal projects, first of all, to be totally honest, are extremely rarely going to be impressive because they were technically challenging, unfortunately. So the reason that they are impressive is, one, if they're launched, because that's already like a pretty small percentage. It has to please no GitHub links. Like think about like a recruiter, for example, can't even like, they don't have any idea what to do with like a GitHub link because they can't necessarily read the code. And number two, it's like actually bring value. So focus on not like what to build in it to impress the recruiter, but think about how you can use it to bring value. And as much as possible, like including measurable metrics in it. And you don't have to like have impressive metrics compared to like a company's metrics or anything. But when I say metrics, it's just like numbers. And use whatever numbers like best highlights the success of your product. So it will be different metrics for every single product. But like, you know, a common one would be like, I actually got like 100 users on this thing and they actually used it, right? Or like some real organization used my product to like facilitate like a meetup or something like that. Or it like reduces the amount of time that it takes for someone to do something to like something else. And even if it's like yourself, like, you know, I was doing this like thing all the time, and I guess like an example was like, we were making like restaurant reservations, and this sounds so bad. Okay, and there's like some restaurants that are like, okay, this is like also a long time ago because it's distant memory, right? I don't know why this example came up because maybe this is just like reminding us, but like some restaurant reservations were just like really hard to like make. So we like built this thing that like scraped open table, which is technically not allowed. But anyway, we did it infrequently enough that they didn't care. And we built this like Facebook group, and we like posted like things that like when availabilities would pop up for like really hard to build restaurants. And actually that was pretty impressive because we like, there was like a few thousand people that ended up joining the group. But even if it like just left it at that, it was like, you know, me and my close group of friends used it and we booked a reservation and we never thought we could. Like that's a great, amazing story. So yeah, if you want to stand out, have your app like create absolutely almost any impact, and like something or an impact ideally that you care about. Just number one answer for that category questions.
Again, losing my mute button. Okay.
You should get a hardware button that you can just push.
You know what? I actually played around with this last time. There is this button right on my microphone, but it also has a little bit of a lag, and I'm like checking to see if the light is blinking or not blinking.
Someone should build a solution to this.
Yeah, who wants to fix my problem? All right.
They do have Zoom apps now, right? I thought I saw something about them launching Zoom apps.
You know what would be cool? If Zoom would like move the mute button so I could take it out of the window that it's in and have it like be expandable. So it's like this big red button. That's what I want.
If someone built that, by the way, like, and it came from like in this conversation, I was in this meetup and this like, like host was like constantly couldn't find the mute button. I just thought like I could solve this problem. That would be the most amazingly impressive story. Like that's a great example.
Thank you for that example. Yes, because our next question I feel like is just going to be a recap of some of the things that we've talked about, or maybe you have some more that it'll spark your idea on. What are some ways in which a bootcamp grad can stand out amongst other candidates applying for jobs?
Okay, so I think that like the limit for using the same answer is like probably 6, and I just used up the last one. So let me think about any other way. I think, okay, so as I mentioned, when I receive like applications for the job listings and on any of the sites where I post the listing, I have to scroll like so much to see the things that like literally like my finger hurts from scrolling so much. There are so many applications. I just have to like, again, just try to imagine you were solving this problem yourself. So I don't know that like, yeah, so I would say to try to get yourself out of that list if at all possible. So what we generally recommend is some kind of balance between applying as often as possible and some percentage of what we call more creative applications. Doing creative applications for absolutely everything is not necessarily effective because, well, one, you won't have enough time, and then two, it actually might be less genuine because you're not picking the companies you're most excited about. So for a few of the companies that you're most excited about, I would just go the extra mile and try to find direct connections into those companies. You know, hiring managers, recruiters, and state a very clear and compelling case. When answering the question, like, why should they hire you out of everyone else? I don't want to answer that question for you. Like, you should answer that question, but whatever that answer is, you need to make that be extremely loud and clear and super, super concise. Like, it should be like one sentence, like 1 or 2 sentences. You can always go into more detail once you have the connection, but you need to summarize, like boil down your entire story and highlight the very #1 thing that they should know. And again, for me, I really love leaning into the building like a unique, like be usable or like impactful like product. That's something that I would really like. I feel like that would be my approach, like by far, is like to build something interesting. But that might not be your answer for why me. Like, maybe it's not your project, but you need to have an answer and then shout it out as loud as you possibly can.
And just to follow up, when you were talking about reaching out to recruiters, I think you were talking about the internal recruiters within a company that might be like the gatekeeper to a job. Is that correct? Or were you talking about
Yes.
all recruiters in general, like headhunters?
So yeah, definitely the internal recruiters have generally the most, it's like actually kind of scary how they have absolute control over who gets an interview. Like often, like the majority of time, like applications, like almost no engineer even sees it before they're like screened out by the recruiter or not. So I would say that, yeah, if you're like applying to a particular job, you should reach out to internal recruiters at that company, like with active listings is by far the best. I have actually seen people like find success by building relationships with headhunters. The type of like connections, it tends to be, I don't know, I feel like it tends to be like, I don't want to say this, like, I feel like they tend to be maybe less strong companies on average. And they tend to be a lot of some of the roles that you might not be gunning for, but they have like access to more opportunities, right? And so like, I would say like, those are actually, but to answer your question, I am in this case, like talking specifically about like, yeah.
Cool. That is interesting to hear. When I was looking for my first job, and then I've heard it from other headhunters since then, the story that I frequently have heard was it doesn't make as much financial sense for companies to look for these third-party recruiters, and people probably won't have as much luck with them. But then I also have heard some boot camps recommend talking to recruiters, and I feel like there's a difference between types of recruiters that might be worth talking to. But it's interesting that you've heard of people having success with those third-party recruiters.
For sure. I've actually had, yeah, some people like have gone through the same recruiter and gotten like multiple interviews at like different companies. And like, like there was this one particular fellow who like had this really good relationship with this person. And like they had like it seemed like a weekly interview. It was like, this is my weekly interview with this company now. And they tended to be a lot of like I said, I felt like there were a lot of like contracting agencies and like some of so they may not be like the best companies, but they were all full software engineering roles, right? And so that was pretty good. It wasn't like bad jobs to start with at all. And it was like a ton of interview practice for this person. So I don't actually remember if it was through that person that he ultimately got a job. But yeah.
Cool. Well, maybe we can do one last question and then invite people to have more of a discussion. So this one is, if you don't do well on the whiteboarding and algorithm part of an interview, is it pretty much a fail? Is there any hope if you bomb this part?
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, a lot of people think of these interviews as such black and white outcomes where it's like, oh, I either like got it perfect or I must have like failed. And like that's one of the first like things that mindsets that we want to get people out of, is that like you can very much get partial credit in interviews and you can score along a whole spectrum of results. So like imagine that like an interview is like worth a total of 100 points, right? And there's all kinds of things that you can do that will like reduce the points, including like getting a hint, right? Like obviously not getting a hint is better, but maybe you lose 5 points. And you for this company, you needed to get like a 70 points to pass the interview, right? And so like, I think people are super extreme. And so no, like you can absolutely, like I've seen people even not solve the problem and still pass, right? So definitely, it's not absolutely a fail. And then the next thing is, this is actually like, I find training for like online assessments to be very different from training for real interviews. We actually really focus on the real interviews part. And in those situations, you actually have so much control over the situation. Like a lot of times people think like, oh, if I just get the answer or not, but it's a very collaborative process. Like a lot of the leak code cards, like in reality, like you wouldn't solve it with no hints on an interview. You would probably get hints. So a lot of it is like in your control to collaborate with the interviewer, right? So like the steps that we talked about earlier, right? So as soon as the question is posed, like asking them questions to clarify certain situations, talking out loud about your thought process, because you might say something like, oh, I wonder if like a queue would be helpful. And then the person's like, well, I'm not sure because like, you know, that's not how the order that, and then you're like, oh, okay, moving on. Maybe a heap, maybe not. And then they're like, oh, interesting, you said heap, why did you say that? And then you're like, oh, well, maybe like this is the right direction. So, so yeah, I also think that it's so cheesy, but if you learn something from the interview, you should also not consider that a fail, because like, you're most likely not gonna pass your first interviews. Let's just like assume that. You're most likely not gonna pass your first 10 interviews, so let's just assume that, right? So, but like, some people will get through their first 10 interviews that they failed and they learned so much in every step and then they're gonna pass the next one. Some people didn't learn anything from the interview. So I have had lots of people where they're like, I felt like I wasn't doing super well, so you know, I just made the most out of it, did the best that I can, and like tried to learn as much from the experience, and that's totally fine.
Yeah,
You said basically everything I would say.
yeah, you can totally turn it into just like a class.
Oh yeah.
If you totally don't know, it's like your opportunity to learn from the senior engineer. If you like totally don't know how to do it, you might actually pass the interview based on the questions you ask and stuff like that, even if you don't solve the problem, because a lot of the interview is just, they want to see how you think and how you communicate. It's not about just getting the right answer to the problem. So yeah, when I'm totally blanking, I turn it around, and in my brain I think of it as I'm just getting a free class from this person.
Anything that can make the stakes feel a little bit lower. I like that. Cool. I said that was maybe going to be the last question, but this one sounds very quick. Are there any cool groups dedicated to active software engineers, computer science students, which would help me enhance my network? Well, ours.
I was just going to say that.
But if anyone has any other suggestions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And if either of you have suggestions that you think of.
I can, we actually have like a list internally that I can send along. I won't just sit here and read through the list, I guess. I'll send it along afterwards.
All right, yeah, we'll post that. Great. So I will go ahead and stop recording for today, and then we can talk.